We now shift our focus to the announcement that came through SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, who says he does not have to disclose confidential information about the tax affairs of President Jacob Zuma. Joining us in studio to talk about who is entitled to obtain confidential tax information is Jean Du Toit, who is the senior tax attorney at Tax Consultants. Jean, thank you so much for your time. So a lot of people have been looking at it, whether it's either a SARS decision or it's a political decision. From your assessment, do you get the sense that Edward Kieswetter, the SARS Commissioner, is using the provisions of the Tax Administration Act to support the stance?
Well, I think the Commissioner certainly did follow the law to the T. He definitely, SARS is prohibited from disclosing taxpayer information unless it's in very specific circumstances, such as where it's in the exercise of a SARS official's duties under a High Court order, or if a specific act trumps the secrecy provisions, or if the taxpayer themselves gives written consent.
One of the things the Commissioner did mention is that they can give off, as you mentioned, tax information, but the thing that we're grappling with is the Public Protector Act, whether the Public Protector is one of the institutions, as he said, is not privy to that information. What are some of the institutions that are, privy to that confidential taxpayer information?
Okay, so the Public Protector Act gives the Public Protector investigative powers to request anyone to provide them with documentation, but it doesn't specifically trump the secrecy provisions.
Right.
There are 3 acts in which the secrecy provisions would not be applicable, which is the Drug Trafficking Act, the Organised Crime Act, and the Financial Intelligence Centre Act.
Right.
Other than that, the tax or the High Court would have to give an order, or as in this case, we would have to obtain written consent from the taxpayer themselves.
And I can imagine for South African taxpayers, this is an issue that they would also find interesting, as well as, it might apply to them, where certain institutions may want access to, their tax records. But the one thing former President Jacob Zuma did on Twitter was to say that he doesn't mind his tax records being sent to the Public Protector. Based on that, then, can SARS then oblige to the Public Protector's request?
Well, I think that's a matter of interpretation. I think SARS would obviously apply the secrecy provisions very strictly,
right,
and wouldn't see that as an express consent for his records to be shared. But if Mr. Zuma is sincere in what he said, perhaps he should give express written consent to the Commissioner, and that might put the end to the matter.
And I'm assuming, social media tweets and posts on Facebook do not necessarily, apply as written permission. You would have to physically write a letter, send it to SARS in order for that to happen.
Yeah, or at least he should direct his message to the Commissioner directly, saying to him, I hereby give consent for my records to be publicized.
From your experience in the tax space, have we ever seen anything like this happen? Because some may argue that it's for public interest. We're seeing it in the US unfolding, where the Democrats are trying to get access to President Trump's, tax returns. Have you seen anything like this?
Well, you raise a very interesting point. So whilst it is very important to protect taxpayer information, and that is in line with your constitutional right, there is a point where the public interest comes into play, such as in this case with the former first citizen of the country, where there are questions whether he filed his taxes correctly. I think the tax base would want to know, has he paid his taxes? If SARS is coming after me, why, if it's so apparently glaring that he's not compliant, why aren't they going after him? And if SARS is either not doing that, or they are saying that they can't disclose if they are purely on the strength of the confidentiality provisions. So the fact is that we don't know. And the question is, for taxpayer morality, at what point do we need to start taking that into account?
Then, throwing it to taxpayers, what kind of advice would you give them should they ever find themselves in a situation like this, where an institution does want access to your SARS records? Is it a case where you approach the taxpayer first and asking for them as to how you filed your tax, or can you bypass the taxpayer and go straight to SARS?
Well, I think even if you are permitted to request the information from SARS, and even if SARS is obliged to disclose it, it's in very limited circumstances, and it's only if the body needs to perform certain regulatory duties to do that, and it is only proportionate for the purpose for which the information was requested. So I think it is very unlikely that your tax information would be disclosed.
Right.
I don't think you need to worry about that unless you're involved in organized crime or something like that.
All right, Jean, we'll have to leave there. Thank you so much for your time. That is Jean Du Toit, is a senior tax attorney at Tax Consulting.